Hello there. This is Nancy Love. This is my cat pen that reminds me of my cats and how I am going to find them and bring them home. I'd like to speak to you very briefly today about a very serious subject. And I'm sorry I even have to. But we live on a world that's very complicated and people endure a lot of stresses, particularly now. And I just want to offer these words of support for folks. I did some of the saddest research I've ever done in my entire life recently. I spent a couple hours one night this week looking at suicide, its methods, and its remedies. And I just really became, um, it's very thought provoking. In my experience in graduate school and as a life coach, I suppose you could say, I have encountered people at some point that needed to be talked off the ledge, figuratively speaking. And every single one of them have come off the ledge because they found a friend in me, and someone would spend an hour or more of their time trying to convince that person that life was worthwhile. This too shall pass is not just something to be found in religious texts, it's the way things are. Everything that we're going through eventually fades or is resolved somehow through effort or through natural processes. So, whatever a person is going through that might cause them to want to take their own life and end it all, if they stick and stay, will get better. Now, there are times when people do have terminal illnesses, and regardless of whatever they try, they don't get better, and they know they won't. And I'm understanding of that self euthanasia aspect of this whole scenario. But that's really not what I'm talking about right now. I'm not talking about people who want to end their lives. There was a fantastic movie many, many years ago called Whose Life Is It Anyway? Richard Dreyfuss was art. And he was so incredibly talented and useful to everyone as a smart, talented person that people tried to stop him from going. And it was a truly fascinating, provocative film. If you ever get to see Whose Life Anyway, I would suggest you do it. Whose life is it anyway, Greta? But let's set that whole issue aside and let's talk about the types of people who are most likely to try to commit suicide or succeed at it. I have read in my life that pharmacists who have a lot of access to chemicals, illegally or legally, doctors who not only have access to chemicals but also have a tremendous amount of stress in their lives very often, veterinarians, here again, maybe you don't think veterinarians are under that much stress, but they are. And they do have, there are a lot of expectations and a lot of sadness when they fail to help a patient. And they also have access to chemicals. What's the common denominator here? Access to drugs that can kill you. And I have preached about this over and over. You need air, you need food, you need water, you need sleep, and virtually everything else you add to your brain chemistry is spin on the ball, and that spin you don't necessarily need. Psychiatric drugs may be helpful, but if we can get by with air, food, water, and sleep, and let our body's brain chemistry work normally, then we're way ahead of the rest of the story. The other types of people, the other professions of people who are most likely to try to kill themselves or succeed at it are military veterans, military, active military, and law enforcement officers. People in the military and people in law enforcement see the worst in humanity. They see things that the rest of us will never see. They're often trying valiantly, with great valor, to protect everyone else from seeing what they see and knowing what they know. But they still know it And post-traumatic stress syndrome is runs rampant in this category of personnel. So does drug and alcohol abuse. And I just really have a soft spot in my heart for veterans and law enforcement officers who suffer so much because they have jobs that cause them to need more courage than the rest of us put together. Now, firearms, access to firearms is one of the big issues, and it's one of the reasons that people in those last two categories I mentioned, military, active, or retired, and law enforcement, are likely to succeed when they commit suicide. Most folks, or many folks, who try to end their own lives use somewhat less lethal means, and sometimes they fail. But people who use guns are a lot less likely to fail, and that's why that may be one of the reasons why statistically they appear to have a higher suicide rate. I will say this: I knew a nurse in Texas who worked in assisted care facilities, and she said one of the saddest cases she'd ever seen, one of the saddest patients she had to tend to, was a young woman in her 20s who had tried to kill herself with a gun and failed, misfired, and was going to be in a vegetative state for the rest of her life. She was basically a physiological husk with no brain included, and that was because when she tried to end her life, she did not succeed. Um, the lady said that most of her patients were geriatric, and it seemed normal, and a lot of them were very happy and satisfied because they had lived full lives and had accomplishments and children and grandchildren and many things to look back on with satisfaction. That young lady couldn't look back at all because she wasn't really there anymore. Now, I have known people who were very accomplished. People in animal rescue also have to see a lot that is very unsavory and outrages them. And I do know someone who was renowned throughout Southern California for her efforts on behalf of animals, all creatures great and small. And I found out within the last year that instead of being all things to all people, sometimes she gets awfully depressed and is pretty much a mess and engages in the use of drugs and alcohol, can't find where her cats are fostered, and can't figure that, or the other out, and is losing her patronage and funding for her animal rescue efforts. And in this case, what I have to say is get off the drugs. I cannot impress upon you all enough: air, food, water, sleep. When I studied antidepressants in graduate school, it wasn't just the drugs themselves and their potentially positive side effects that I studied. It was a 400-page book this thick of side effects of antidepressants. And over and over and over, it said the primary side effect of this antidepressant is, ta-da, depression. They're self-limiting. They can help immediately and help correct brain chemistry rather quickly. But lo and behold, about 4 months into 4 to 6 months into taking these, the brain becomes satiated or desensitized to them, and then you need more. So there's an escalating process where you have to take more and more in order to get the same effects. But lo and behold, when you realize that cognitive therapy, talk therapy, talking to someone, whether that's a peer counselor, a minister, a psychologist, you check into a clinic of some sort, talk therapy tends to have the same type of time ratio, but without the escalating effects. 4 months of talk therapy is as good as 4 months of drug therapy. So why the heck would anybody go on antidepressants when all they need to do really is to get help psychologically? Now, the exact same nurse did tell me, the one that I mentioned who worked in assisted care facilities, did mention one time that she had gone on antidepressants. We've known each other about 30 years. We stay in contact by telephone. And she said, Nancy, they helped immediately. I thought I could fly. I was not depressed within a few days, and I was so much better off. But lo and behold, by the second or third month, when my medical insurance wouldn't um, pay for the drugs, paying $60 to $90 a month for this added expense, and this was decades ago when that was a lot more money than it is now because of inflation. She said the cost of her antidepressants and her feeling of dependence on them had become a whole new source of fear and depression. So think on this, my friends. We are naturally equipped with most of what we need physiologically to deal with a lot of problems. A lot of disease processes are naturally healable if we look to natural means and simple means rather than complicated pharmaceutical ones. I've said it before, I've said it again, I'll say it again. The simple is profound. The profound is simple. In closing, I will tell you about a study I read in the 1980s that said that some scientists had, psychologists had interviewed 100 people who survived suicide attempts. And the statistics in this thing were phenomenal because you almost never see a 100% response rate in any survey research. But 100% of the 100 people were glad they'd survived. They were glad they'd failed at something in life, which was ending their life. And I thought, that's really fascinating. And then it said that approximately 50% of them were using alcohol when they decided to end their lives. And there was a very short time period, a very short time period between the time they decided to end their life and the time they attempted to. They were jumping off bridges or grabbing guns or running out into heavy traffic or doing something of that nature. And every single, listen to me, every single one of those people said they would never, ever have tried to commit suicide if they hadn't been drunk when they made the decision to do so. Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. Alcohol is a neurotoxin, and your brain is made out of nerves. So when you drink, you are basically poisoning your brain. And what do you expect it to do with poison in it but think crazy? So consider dropping the booze because so many of these people, about half of the people, had credited or blamed rather alcohol for the fact that they were in that survey at all. And every single one of them, all 100 of the individuals that responded, that were interviewed in that survey, performed by well, uh, degreed professional psychologists, said that what the specific instances of depression, the specific criteria of what was going on in their lives that caused them to be so adamant about leaving, got resolved, usually within a year or less. Whatever made them want to commit suicide to begin with got resolved somehow. So I really, really, really want you all to think on this because after reading that research, I was just wrecked. I'm so worried about people, particularly in the coronavirus crashed economy. There are people who are grieving loved ones who died suddenly over this pandemic. There are a lot of people who are suffering economically and maybe housing insecure for the first time in their entire lives. So, incidents of child abuse, domestic violence between spouses, um, and drug and alcohol abuse have soared. We're all in this together. There's not one of us who can figure this world out alone. And although everybody's got their own idea about why we're here, all I know is that we are definitely in this together. So go Team Love. Let's solve our issues. Let's take a deep breath. As Gene Roddenberry would say, Let's live long and prosper.